which is a very odd record.
An astonishingly odd record. Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
All right, mate. Yeah, I'm all right. So the plan is we're going to go through the XTC catalogue. So XTC have been my lockdown discovery. I started listening to him. I messaged Simon and said, do you like XTC? Because a lot of these stuff reminds me of you. And a lot of the songwriting moves, because there's some really, really lovely songwriting moves in the XTC catalogue. And there's certain chord changes, and it's really clever stuff. And I messaged you and said, XTC, are they a big thing for you? Do you remember?
To which I went, hell's yeah.
And so it was kind of basically over the course of the last, since last March time, I did have Skylarking before that, but I've sort of gradually discovered the catalogue, and bloody hell. And it's like with Skylark, it's like, oh, that's where Jellyfish got that from. That's where Jason Faulkner got that from. And I don't know how I missed them. It's a bit like Cardiacs. I missed Cardiacs as well. And, you know, I only discovered Cardiacs 10 years ago, and I only discovered XTC last year. So I had a best of XTC, and I never really got into it probably about 15, 20 years ago. But you followed them early on, didn't you?
Yeah, I got into them. The very first album of theirs that I remember was Drums and Wires. Mm. And we'll get to that in a second, but they released the single off it, which was Making Plans for Nigel. And one of the things that I love about XTC is they have this ability throughout their entire discography to weird you out.
Yeah,
in a most beautiful way. They unsettle you in a way that you want more unsettling, I suppose, is the best. This is where I think they and Cardiacs actually do cross paths in a lot of ways. They have this ability to take you out of your comfort zone and make you enjoy it.
It's they're very unusual. I mean, I think the only a very similar band, probably I'd say Cardiacs is another one that lived in their own little world.
Yes,
and it's sort of there's no one else really. I mean, like I said, Jellyfish sounded a lot like the Skylark, you know, but that was only one album.
Yes,
and they went off into these other adventures, and it was a very strange catalogue.
They are musical chameleons, that band.
Yeah, it's very odd. But, I mean, I can see where a lot of people have taken certain eras and made a career out of it, haven't they?
Yes, that's a great way of describing it. Yes.
So we'll do it album by album. So
all right.
I think I'm going to let Simon lead on like this because he's a bit more experienced with this than I am. So we'll start with.
Are you saying I'm the old lag here?
I'm saying that I once again I managed to miss a very important band. So as usual.
Well, speaking of the Cardiacs, the very first album that they released, which was White Music, which I think, and I've got a little some cribbing notes here.
Yeah.
Which is in 1978.
Yeah,
that's the one to my ears that sounds the most like Cardiacs. There was, and you've got to remember that Cardiacs and XTC are direct contemporaries. While Cardiacs were making Cardiacs music at this time. Back in the 70s. I think they were called Cardiac Arrest at this point. But
and this is all the stuff that Cardiacs did on the garage concerts.
That's it. That's the one.
When Carver's played with them. And Carver's is really into XTC as well.
Yeah, I mean, as we go through this discography, you'll realise that that while XTC had enormous, you've got to remember that they had enormous commercial success during the early 80s. And like they were starting to fill like stadiums, big sort of like stuff. They have become a musician's band. They're the musicians.
Yeah.
They're the band that really generate a lot of interest from other bands that have gone on to become famous. They're a, what do they call it? The God Tree, basically. And the first album, White Music, it's very angular. very sort of like Cardiacs and stuff. And I remember sort of like seeing, I had a DVD back in the day, and sort of things like Radios in Motion and Crossed Wires, and they did a version of All Along the Watchtower on this in their own incredibly what would you call it, interesting and unique way. But if there's one song which I think Cardiacs and XTC have the most in common with, it's the last track on the album, which is called Neon Shuffle. And if you listen to that, you can see where the two of them are like cross-pollinating in that respect.
It's a lot of it's people playing in the punk circles, but they're obviously, they came from via Prague and 70s rock stuff, and there's all sorts of Andy Partridge talks about a lot. Who's the classical guy, the Music Concrete guy?
Oh, Edgar Varese.
One of those, but he's one of these. He's very unusual. He's coming at pop music from a very odd angle, but it's still pop. There's still big choruses. There's still, the songwriting's amazing, but he's coming at it from a very odd angle, and he's like, it's very strange stuff.
I think you've really summed up in two words there, actually, what XTC is about all the way through their discography, which is big choruses. They can do almost anything, but they always come back to the chorus. They always have a hook. They always have a sort of like, a little plateau from which they can, sort of announce their intentions for each song.
Right, so we'll go to Go To, which is the next one.
Yeah, Go To is the one I actually know the least, but it's the album cover I love the most. If you've ever seen
it's great.
The Go To album cover.
This is a record cover. Didn't Andy Partridge design all the covers as well?
I know he had a big hand in the design of a lot of the album covers. Even if it wasn't a case of him directly creating them, I think he was like very closely in with the art direction. He's quite a sort of what would you call it? A Renaissance man when it comes to art. I mean, I remember seeing a documentary in which he talks about the many things that he's interested in. Everything from he designs board games, all the way down to art design,
and he's really into model toy soldiers as well. Isn't he?
Exactly. And I think. I think it was Thelonious Monk that once said a genius is the artist most like himself, and I think it comes down to the fact that he is absolutely who he is, and there's no denying that the man has an incredible vision with his art in whatever venture he goes with. But Go To is an interesting one. I think that was the one which has one of my favourite singles on it, which is where is it? Where is it? Oh no, it's not this album. Oh, sorry, I'm talking bullshit. It's not this album. There's another track which I'll come to in a second. But
this is the last one with Barry Andrews on it. We had that.
Yes, yeah. And funnily enough, actually, I had a friend of mine who it turns out that Barry Andrews was a teacher.
Oh, really?
And he was taught by Barry Andrews as a kid.
Cool.
And so sort of Barry Andrews sort of, as is often the way, we all have to make a living in this world. And Barry Andrews was his teacher for a while. It's a shame because I think Barry Andrews was a very talented guy. He went on to do some stuff with Robert Fripp.
League of Gentlemen, which I love that. I'm a massive fan of that. There's a live League of Gentlemen Fripp album. It's got Barry Andrews on it, and there was a load of bootlegs they released on the DGM website, the King Crimson website.
Wow,
really cool. I mean, you can hear the King Crimson, the disciplinary King Crimson stuff coming through with the lot. With Phipps doing those a
lot of those fast arpeggios.
Well, that sort of he says. Well, that stuff, all those. My hands are a bit too cold at the minute. I did used to be able to do it, but the that sort of sound coming into it. So, What's so next one? Drum. So this was the commercial breakthrough a little bit more, I suppose. Drums and Wires, wasn't it?
Yeah, I always remember one of my most what would you call it? Sort of most poignant, or at least profound memories of Drums and Wires around about this time was, I think it was released in, was it 79? But I remember sort of at the time, because I was just like a little hairy arsehole. I really wasn't, I was a music listener rather than a musician. And I always remember Stuart Copeland, because I know that XTC toured with the Police.
They did, yeah.
And I remember because they would come up on stage and jam together, the two bands. And I always remember Stuart Copeland on his drums at the back wearing a Drums and Wires T-shirt. And this was before I really got into XTC. And I thought, that's a really cool T-shirt. I wonder who that is. And then being a kid, completely forgot about it. But this is the one, I think this is the one which has the hit that I remember, which is, I think it was, is it Making Plans for Nigel
on this one? Yeah. So and this is where, because Colin Moulding wrote it, and this became the sort of pattern of Colin Moulding getting the singles, which really upset Andy Partridge, didn't it? because he was, the person who had the hit, therefore Making Plans for Nigel. Then he got a lot of the other singles going forward, didn't he? So
yeah, he did actually. I don't think Andy Partridge actually got himself his own hit until a couple of albums later. So for someone as
Overtime would be the big one.
That's it. Yeah,
which is a very odd record,
an astonishingly odd record. I mean, I personally think that you could say that Colin Moulding back in the day was the man that made XTC successful, but Andy Partridge was what made them unique.
Yeah, because even on Making Plans for Nigel, which is a funny record, because it's one of those things, I can remember that record from when I was a kid. It's one of those records that's always seems to have been there, I mean, in my subconscious, like Free or Right Now or Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. But when you actually listen to Making Plans for Nigel, it's very, very odd, because there's this like backing vocal that sounds like a seal, and there's this sort of broken guitar part, and it's like, yeah, it's like, and it's got this pop song, but it's like, and they've took it to bits and put the drums are the wrong way round, and it's like, it's very odd.
I remember that this is the first album that I think Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham
so this is
started producing
that sound, the sucking sound.
Yeah, and it's this big drum sound. The drum sound that would then go on to become like super famous for the vast majority of the 80s. And Hugh Padgham, of course, also worked with both Peter Gabriel and Genesis and Phil Collins. So that drum sound was starting to develop here. You can hear it actually on some of these tracks. That big. It wasn't gated, but it was that big Phil Collins pan, big echoing a room drum sound was happening on this.
So this is Dave Gregory arrives, and Dave Gregory's
obviously indeed, a
lovely man and hugely talented. And I met Dave Gregory. You see, I knew Dave Gregory before I really knew anything about XTC, because he was in Tin Spirits, and I opened for Tin Spirits, and I think it was Tin Spirits and Sanguine Hum. But I got talking to Dave, and he was really. I didn't know anything about his music, to be honest. Just this bloke who's a guitarist, and Tin Spirits, the nicest band in the world. They were just such cool guys. Daniel and those. They were great. Daniel, who does the that pedal show and the gig rig, and Dave. We just ended up talking about the Beatles and the Mad Vision Orchestra. He's really into the Mad Vision Orchestra.
Is he really?
Yeah. We were talking about we had our guitars out backstage. We had our guitars out, so we're going.
Oh yeah,
and we were talking about the way that She's So Heavy leads to the.
Yes.
And then there was a real similarity between the way McLaughlin did the arpeggios, and the Beatles did the arpeggios around the same time, leading from 69 to 71. And he was just a really interesting bloke. And I thought, well, I probably should have checked a bit more of his music out, really. But I saw Tin Spirits. I loved his playing with Tin Spirits, and I really loved Tin Spirits. They were brilliant. But you know what life's like. You're getting on with your own stuff. This must have been about 2013, 2014, and I was off doing other stuff. So it wasn't until we had a bit of time during lockdown you start checking out music and stuff, isn't it? And then you start delving into the catalogue. But he was a lovely guy, really, and I hope I get to talk to him again. Actually, we could ask him on to interview him on here.
I was going to say he'd be a great guy to sort of sort of chat with, because he's a genuine fan of music. I actually met him myself at all places at the Royal Albert Hall, because I was sitting next to him at a Spinal Tap gig.
Oh, great!
Spinal Tap toured. Their tour was called "Break Like the Wind."
Brilliant.
And he happened to be sitting next to me.
That's so cool.
And it was like, "Are you Dave Gregory from XTC?" And he went, "Yeah, I am."
Bloody yeah! He's just a really nice dude. Really nice.
Yeah, lovely bloke. Really lovely, down to earth. Sort of would happily chat with you.
But if I'd known who he was, I'd have been quite scared and not spoken to him. But because I wasn't a fan then, you see. But now I'm a fan. I find him quite frightening. I would find it quite difficult. But I'm sure it wouldn't be. I'm sure he was just a very nice man, and don't have to know a lot about music. Bloody hell!
Yeah, that man. He knows his stuff.
Bloody hell! So we had that. We had which is kind of a bit more of a commercial. So should we move on to Black Sea?
Yeah, now we're getting into the moment where I became a huge fan of the band.
Yeah.
This was the album for me that made me a fan of their music, Black Sea, and it's got some of the best stuff that they in my opinion, that they've ever sort of done. Like you've got Generals and Majors on it, and Respectable Street, and Towers of London, and Sergeant Rock is one of the very first singles I ever bought, actually. And again, it's one of these. Sergeant Rock is a classic case in point of what an XTC song is about. It's this incredibly dissonant verse, and then an incredibly harmonic and joyful chorus.
And it's like Generals and Majors. There's all sorts of stuff that's weird on that. There's like a whistling solo, isn't there? Always like a synth doing a whistle thing, and then. But I saw on YouTube some video footage of them live. I think it's roughly around this. They're incredible live. Bloody hell.
I mean, they basically between. I've got to remember. I can't remember who the drummer is now, but he was
Barry Chambers on this one.
Barry, he. An absolutely astonishing drummer who played in a very interesting and almost like a serial way, like if you built a drum machine up, and he would play, and no one drum was he was never hitting something at the same time. It was always it was very angular, and it was just perfect for that sound. And he had such incredible weight and timing behind him, certainly on the records.
Bizarre.
But you can see that there was a chemistry between the four of them. Dave Gregory was basically almost being the John Paul Jones, handling all the other instruments.
All the arrangements and the synths.
And you can see him play. I think he plays keyboards on stage for some of the tracks. And basically, you've got two guys singing. They've got loads of hits. And they're a rock solid rhythm section as well.
So at this point, I mean, they were becoming quite big, weren't they? This is where
I remember this was the ones where it was you knew a band was getting big when you were seeing them in the charts regularly. Sort of they'd now had, I think, 3 top 40 hits at this point. I can't be absolutely sure that, but I'd certainly heard at least 3 singles by them.
You got to remember, it was weird at the time. It's even though me and you lived through that sort of time, there was 3 or 4 TV stations, or 3 at the time, I think, and there was 4 radio stations. So if you were popular at the time, everybody would know who you were. It's not like you can have a number 1 singles now, and most people won't hear you. because there's so much diversity of media. But at the time, if you had a hit, you had a hit, and people knew who you were. You on the
yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, people were singing your songs in hairdressers and mechanic shops all over the world.
Hard to imagine now, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a different time, So we just stopped finishing using papyrus to write on.
So the next one is English Settlement, and that's Senses Working Overtime would be the sort of big hit, wasn't it?
Yes, that's exactly right. This is really, if I'm being really honest with you, this English Settlement is the moment, in my opinion, where XTC started to really sound like the XTC that we all know. If you know what I mean.
That single, the verse on that is do 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 do. I mean, it's like, that's odd. That is, you wouldn't put that in a single, would you?
No, and this is, again, as you were saying, this was Andy Partridge's first hit. One of the things that hit me about Andy Partridge is when I heard him being interviewed, he's genuinely thinking about all of the details. I remember him talking about the pacing of the lyric and the way that the lyric reflected what was happening in the music and how it built up and how it was telling a story. And as a young musician, I was going, my God, it's not just coming together by accident. He does it on purpose.
Unbelievable. I mean, it's very, very vision. I mean, someone had a vision of the record in their head and they had to make it come out, didn't they? But that thing with the chords in Senses Working Overtime, and it's one of them things, because when you think of that single, you think of the chorus, but the verse is really odd. It's really odd.
Yeah, it is a very, very odd. I'm just looking at some show notes for English Settlement. Apparently, it was a double album. I didn't realise it was that big. So you can see that they were going through a very prolific time in their career. And I think that it just goes to show exactly how many they had 2 discs of stuff and stuff left over as well. And I think the track listing, because it's not only has it got, and this is the thing that really get me, is I remember seeing them. This was the first time I actually saw them. I think it was on the old Grey Whistle test or something, and they did, like, I think No Thugs in Our House and maybe Yacht Song, maybe, I don't know, I can't remember now, but that was when I first physically saw them playing live, that wasn't in the music video, if you know what I mean. And that was when I went, oh my God, these guys are amazing. They're absolutely astonishing. And but it's my favorite track on that album is Ball and Chain, which I think, is that a Colin Moulding one?
I'm just looking at, I don't know. Let's have a look.
Let me just double check. Yeah, it's a Colin Moulding song.
Yeah.
And I have a very soft spot for the Colin Moulding tracks.
Yeah, it's a great song.
There's a sort of almost Steve Marriott kind of quality to the songs that he writes. That they're quirky, but they're very catchy as well.
It's just bizarre that. I suppose because they stopped touring, I never really discovered them because they weren't playing live. I suppose that's one of the things. So was it after this album they stopped touring? Was it?
Yeah, it was. It was around about this time that I think Andy Partridge and self-confessed he had an addiction, I think, to painkillers, and he's also. And I'm from the outside looking in on this. You could tell he was quite a highly strung individual, much like we were talking about before the camera started, that it's easy to have fun when you're in the support band and enjoy yourself. But when you're the headline band,
it's the pressures that it's not gaming. It's the people are coming and you feel like you don't want to let them down. And I think
exactly right.
A friend of mine said to me actually that there's 2 ways you can go. Some bands get really, really good. They really tighten up, and it forced. I think with us, it forced us to get better because we practiced. We felt like an obligation to the audience to not let them down. But some people, the pressure becomes too much, so they drink or they deal with it like that, or they become complacent. and then the plane goes to what's anyway. But so the pressure on bands, I've only ever had success at a pub, small venue level, so I don't know what it's like to be in a big band. But I could only imagine what it's like for these guys.
Yeah, and there's actual footage of poor old Andy. They were halfway through a gig,
right,
and he got to a point where obviously something snapped in his head, and he couldn't do it any longer. And you can see the footage. That the thing that I found interesting about that is he was performing full on right up to the moment when all of a sudden he went, nope, can't do it any longer. And that was what really I found that probably the most. Your empathy kicks in for someone when you're in those kind of situations, and he said, "No, I can't do this any longer."
It's not very nice. It's a very tough gig, though.
Well, especially back in the day when record companies drove artists incredibly hard. It was like cattle being driven across a plain. They were doing absolutely everything. They didn't give a damn about the artist. Just make money.
There was just loads of money in it in them days, and then now obviously there's no money in it at all. So,
yeah, exactly. And also, you can be a successful artist without ever playing a show nowadays. But that just wasn't the case back in the day, and it essentially broke something inside of Andy. Or you could see it from a positive point of view, and he finally had a moment of clarity and went, "No, this is not what I want to be doing."
Yeah, I mean, I can relate. I mean, I can understand why. A lot of the funnest bit is just making records, isn't it? And there's quite a bit of footage on YouTube of him. They did all the kids' TV shows, didn't they? They did all the they did Saturday Superstore and all this sort of stuff. And it's
did they do Tiswas?
I don't know, but there's one of them doing. I think it's Swap Shop with Noel Edmonds, and it's just bizarre that you'd have a band that you wouldn't have had a credible artist on Swap Shop these days, because I mean, obviously the kids aren't into rock music anymore. Kids are mostly into hip hop now, and they wouldn't be watching Swap Shop anyway, would they?
I'll be honest with you. It's well, if I'm being really honest with you, it's like anything else. Change is an inevitability.
Yeah.
You can't push it back, and any attempt to push back at it shows your age, if you know what I mean.
I think the only, like what I say in life, and the only constant is change, and you have to keep going, don't you? So that's. But
I'll be honest with you, that's what gets me up in the morning. I don't want to. As much as I'd like to think that I'm a routine individual, I genuinely, at my core, don't want today to be like yesterday.
Yeah, of course, yeah, and that's the thing of, trying to discover new music all the time, isn't it? And this is why finding this XTC catalogue has been a bit of a gift to me over lockdown, to be honest.
Well, I'm pleased.
Yeah, no, it's been really good, actually. So we're on to Mama next. So
yeah, Mama is possibly, if I'm being really honest with you, is one of the albums which I like the least, which is strange because it's actually got another hit on it, which is Love on a Farm Boy's Wages.
It's a great record, isn't it?
And it's got also Great Fire, which is another one which I really like as well.
So Terry Chambers has left at this point as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, because of course Terry was very much of a live artist, and I think it also was. Did he move to Australia or something? I can't remember.
Eventually, I don't know if that was something that I remember him going. Apparently, the story was he went to Australia and then came back to do the TC and I gigs, didn't he, with Colin Molden last year?
Right.
3 years ago, actually, not last year. Lost a year there somewhere there, didn't we?
It's easy to do in these times.
At the moment, yeah. This one with Love of the Farm Boys, which is a great record. We've got some good stuff on it. But it's not one I go back to a lot. I think I've only listened to it a few times, that one.
I'm very much in your camp on that one. It's not like it's a bad album, but I personally think that, how do you follow English Settlement?
English Settlement's fantastic, yeah.
That was a massive outpouring of artistic endeavour, that one.
So we're on to the Big Express next.
Now we're talking. This is one of the albums again which really brought XTC into focus for me, because there is just so much incredible music on this album. It's I remember the very first track of theirs which I heard from this album was "Wake Up," and it's so interesting. Sort of like, we were talking about the sort of cross pollination, or at least sort of like the similarity between XTC and Cardiacs, in their way of thinking. If you listen to "Wake Up" and then you listen to a track like "Fiery Gun Hand" from and I'm not saying that one was copying the other in any way.
They're drawing from a similar pool of influence.
Exactly right, yeah. And they're playing with polyrhythms on this in a way which I found astonishingly. Both of those tracks.
That's it. The intro to "Wake Up" is just very close to the intro to "Fiery Gun Hand," isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Of course it is. I was listening to "Wake Up" the other day, and I thought, I tell you what, that didn't half sound similar. It's like and it's like and it's going like one guitar doing that. Oh, of course it bloody is. Of course it is. Because I thought Cardiacs invented that.
But it just goes.
No disrespect to Cardiacs, they invented valves and things.
But
I mean, of course it bloody is. Well, that's again. Very clever, very clever.
But it's also got another one of my top XTC tracks, which is "All You Pretty Girls," which is incredibly pertinent for today, which sort of like the 2021 seems to be the year of the sea shanty.
Yes.
And it's sort of like, when you listen to "All You Pretty Girls," it's got that sea shanty kind of sort of that kind of thing that they got going on in it, which is great. And it also has this fantastic mellotron all the way through the track as well.
Yeah, I do like their mellotron work, actually. There's some nice mellotron. I'm a big on the mellotron. I think the next record we do is going to have lots of mellotron. I've got into it. I've got a sample bank of mellotrons that I'm very, very into at the moment. It's an amazing sound, isn't it?
But yeah, I mean, it's a timeless sound. It's one of those things which, if you forgive me for diverging for a second off XTC, the mellotron is one of those. I mean, if you don't know what a mellotron is, it was a very early sampler using tapes rather than chips to actually produce these sounds, and so you got sort of quasi-realistic strings and vibes and guitars. You could do pretty much anything if you could make a tape for it. But they got used. It's been used. It's David Bowie used it. King Crimson used it. XTC used it.
Genesis on Watcher in the Sky, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it has that sound, and I love that in "All You Pretty Girls." It has this big sort of what I call lo-fi anthemic.
Yeah, and then Boards of Canada sort of. Radiohead, and it's one of those. It's a sound you actually hear it quite a bit on hip hop records as well, where people use degrade them. They used like either a mellotron or a lo-fi string sounds as well. So it's quite on modern pop records you hear stuff that's, I suppose a lot of the time it's because you can get the vocal to hit more. So if you've got lo-fi keyboards or strings, the vocal sits higher in the mix, doesn't it? So
yes,
probably to do with that. I mean, they're cleverer guys than me. What do I know? But it's I would imagine that's kind of how it works. But so that's a great one, isn't it? And that's another one that Lynn drums on this one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
odd drum sounds.
I think also I can't remember where it was, but it was at some point around this time or close to this time that they started to use Prairie Prince, the drummer from the Tubes, regularly as their sort of session drummer. I know that they've had a lot of named drummers over the years, like what's his name? Mattox, the guy from Fairport Convention, also played on the drummer from Fairport.
Should we have a look? See if I can find it. Peter Phipps on this one.
Oh, Peter Phipps, yeah.
It was from Glitter Band.
That's it, yeah. And they basically were sort of, I think what they were doing is they were almost using different drummers as like sound presets you would use on a synthesizer to get different kind of textures and tones. And that was a very clever thing to do, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I really like that one. I think That's a very cool record. I think it's once again, you could see them moving the sound forward as well.
Yeah.
So what we got? So we'll talk about Duke's Stratosphere here as well. So 25 o'clock.
Yes.
Bloody yeah, I mean, just to think they made all these records so just banging them out one after another as well. It was an incredible process, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, with 25 o'clock, they adopted a pseudonym, which was the Dukes of Stratosphere, and I think they released an EP and an album. It was like Ships from the Chocolate Fireball or something like that, and then it was Psionic Sunspot.
Just insane levels of creativity, though.
I know, and they I think I can't remember. Was it Colin Moulding's brother was involved in this one?
Dave Gregory's brother Ian.
Dave Gregory's. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. But yeah, it's a really cool album. That I really like it.
Yeah, it's one of the ones which I always considered like to be the lost classic in the XTC arsenal. No one knows about the Dukes of Stratosphere, and no one knows about 25 o'clock. And I think
it's like Nugget sound, isn't it? Like the Nuggets sort of.
Yeah, it's that psychedelic thing. Yeah. But I think it paved the way for the next album that we're about to talk about. Yeah,
so I mean that's a great record, that Duke's Stratosphere.
Yeah.
Apparently at the time it was quite popular. I don't know because I wasn't there at the time, but apparently it's very popular at the time. And John Leckie produced it. He went on to do the Stone Roses and Radiohead and stuff. And obviously I had previously done John Lennon, and I think he'd worked on Beatles sessions and stuff. So it's got that sound, the Nugget psychedelic, and it sounds so authentic. I mean, to the point where you wouldn't know it was made in the 80s, which is it's very hard to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I really have no idea how they came up with the concept, but it was a little bit of genius what they did, because they were much in the same ways the Beatles did with Sgt. Pepper's. They were able to adopt a persona under which they could write, and I think it obviously must have worked for them.
Unbelievable. So, right, okay. So, Skylarking.
Yes.
Which is probably my favourite XTC album,
and I think it's probably the most successful. I think it's their Sgt. Pepper. If I'm actually no, the album that follows this is their Sgt. Pepper. This is very much their Revolver.
It's great. I mean, it's one of those. There's so much to it, and that's where so much of Jellyfish's sound came from. I mean, there's some very specific stuff that Jellyfish referenced from this album, and like 100 Umbrellas is one of my favourite songs from it. Every track's a winner, and it's just got such a wonderful atmosphere to it as well.
It was an astonishing recording triumph when you consider that apparently there was a lot of antipathy between Andy Partridge and their producer Todd Rundgren during the making of this album.
Well, he's got form, hasn't he, as someone who's wound a lot of people up over the years.
Yeah, I know. But he's a Philly lad, actually, funny enough. I don't know if you know this. Yeah, Todd Rundgren, he's a Philly lad. And
do you see him in the shops much? Or?
Yeah, he's constantly sort of like saying, "Are those your sausages, Todd?" You know, so yeah, he's
trying to get to the shop. Bloody Todd Rundgren again. Ubiquitous.
Yeah, you just can't. You know, he's always in front of you in the queue, or sort of like, you know, borrowing your bicycle pump when you're out riding bikes and stuff.
Can't move for Todd Rundgren. I mean, this is probably the most poppy album they did, wasn't it? It's very
I agree with you. I think it's probably the one where they came to the sort of like the mainstream, and of course it has the hit "Dear God" on it.
What a record!
Yeah, when you consider, I mean, have you ever seen the video?
Yeah.
Great video as well.
It's odd. It's very odd, but it's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I suppose, to be honest with you, you know, it wouldn't be XTC if they didn't have a sort of a large glob of odd in it. But I genuinely think that this is their Revolver or their pet sounds in some ways, because it's it's about, as you say, the most poppy that I think they ever became. Really,
I found a demo of Dear God the other day, actually, on one of the it's on there's like on Spotify. There's the box set, the XTC box set thing, and there's a demo on it with Dave Gregory playing all the string parts, but playing them on Mellotron.
Really?
It's really cool, yeah. It's really cool.
Oh, now that I have to check out then.
It's really cool. I hadn't heard it before, but I found it the other day, and it's like, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant. You know what I mean? But yeah, 1,000 Umbrellas is the other one.
Yeah.
Just that string arrangement is just bloody hell. You know?
It is astonishing about how it's one of those songs which has one of the best endings.
Just thinking about it.
This sort of like this kind of dissonant growl to the strings as it then sort of resolves on a really odd chord, but it is so, it's almost what's the word, Alfred Hitchcock like in that respect.
It's somewhere between, I mean, I think when the Beatles did Eleanor Rigby, they used the Bernard Herrmann string arrangements as a reference. I think George Martin said that. I vaguely remember reading an interview with George Martin, and it's very much a continuation of the Bernard Herrmann school of string arrangement, very close mic'd. Great, I love it. And the other thing is, Dear God wasn't originally in the running order for the album, was it? Imagine having a banger like that. I think, let's leave it off.
I think it was it Mermaid Smiled or something that was, because I know that I actually had the version which didn't contain Dear God.
Oh my God! Imagine,
and it was either Mermaid Smiled or Another Satellite. It was one of those tracks from the second side which didn't have Dear God on it.
Can you imagine that? Just going, I'll leave it. Leave it. No, it's all right. We got plenty. Don't need any more. Just what the?
I know. What can you say? Well, I suppose these are the kind of problems you want to have if your cup overfloweth.
Okay, so. Who was on drums? So this is Prairie Prince on this one. Tube's guy, isn't it? So,
and he basically stayed on and off with XTC for quite a few albums, if I remember correctly, and I think they were all the better for it because he brought a sort of like almost like a jazzy kind of quality to their playing, but he had a lot of. He still had the punk punch. But he had this ability to swing that I don't think they possessed up until this point. Now, this is also, can I just make mention, this is also the moment where I actually did become an uber fan of XTC.
But this is the record that, because I heard the greatest hits and I'd heard it and I couldn't find a way in. You know, with bands, you have to find a way in.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a way in until I heard that album and I was like, oh, bloody hell, this is amazing.
Can I also just show you this, this is the alternate album cover, which apparently Andy Partridge wanted to have, which the record company wouldn't allow, which they've recently re-released, and it's
saucy.
I know. It's for those who can't see it on my crap camera. It's a picture of a woman's lady garden. And
you should have seen the cover they wanted to use. Yeah. It wasn't a glove.
Oh God. So yeah, that this is one of the downsides, one of the real tragedies of XTC is back in the UK I was burgled.
Oh, sorry to.
In the, I think it was like the mid 80s or something, or the mid to late 80s, and I had my entire record collection stolen.
Oh, blimey.
All of my CDs, all of my vinyl, all gone, and so as a result, I don't have any of my original XTC albums except for one, and we'll come to that in a second. But yeah, so as a result, I had to rebuy an awful lot of my XTC stuff on CD and vinyl in some cases.
It's hard to imagine then if your record collection gets stolen, you can't listen to stuff anymore because we're so used to been able to just find it online, aren't we? So
yeah.
So the next one on Sonic Sunspot. The second Stratosphere album, which I haven't listened to a lot. I listened to it once, I think. I remember Brainiac's Daughter being good. but I haven't gone through.
And Vanishing Girl, the opening track is pretty damn good as well.
I just, for some reason, I haven't spent a lot of time with that, and I must. I'm not, and a lot of these records, I need to. Any new band you discover, you have to dig. With the XTC catalog, it's so rich as well. I mean, everything you'd go is just like bloody hell. This is incredible. You know what I mean?
It's an intellectual gatto.
Just so much of it. So the next one is Oranges and Lemons.
Yeah, so this is probably my second favourite album of theirs.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
and it's sort of like every now and again it's swapped with Skylarking for me. So
is this the one you feel is their sort of Sgt. Pepper sort of thing?
I think so. It shares a lot of the same kind of if you pardon me using a sort of like long and obscure word, fecundity. As English Settlement, i.e., they were producing a lot of material at this point, and they were very creative, and there was an outpouring of creativity, and it's my personal opinion, and this is just me doing psychobabble, that I think that Andy Partridge is at his best in the spotlight in some ways. You know, once they had a hit with Skylarking, I think in some ways the band sort of maybe unconsciously said, well, people think we have something to say. People want to listen. Let's give them an album that we feel is worthy of that attention. And they came up with Oranges and Lemons.
It's a great record. I mean,
yeah, it's an astonishing record. And again, going back to what I was talking about being burgled and having all my records stolen, it's the only record of XTC which they didn't steal, and that's because
they'd already got it.
No, it was that would be great if they did. I got that one, but that's because I bought it in this format.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is 3 little mini CDs. If I can open it up and show you, sort of like
So they didn't identify it as a CD.
So yeah, as far as they were concerned, it may have been a pack of cigarettes. I don't know, to be honest with you, but
so cool.
So that's the only one of the from my original record collection that I still own, because they didn't steal it.
That is so cool. Love it.
And it was I don't know why I even bought it like that, because it was a pain in the arse to listen to the album.
So, yeah, it's a bit like an 8-track or something.
Pretty much.
Change it, yeah.
But with regards to you, what's sort of like the standout tracks that you think about this album? Then, what do you like about it?
I went through a stage of listening to Mayor of Simpleton over and over again.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like the feeling you get from Good Day Sunshine by the Beatles. Or,
yes.
It's just joyous pop music, but clever pop music as well.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
And there's stuff on Garden of Earthly Delights where it's that kind of psychedelic summer sound that there's like the Beatles Magic and Mystery Tour EP has got it. And there's that sort of because some of it's quite modal and it's kind of drony on Garden of Earthly Delights, but then it goes into the choruses, and the choruses are all really good. But yeah, no, it's a genius pop album, isn't it? So
there is so much to unpack here. I mean, not least by the fact that it actually has one of what I consider to be sort of like their best ever written tracks, which is Chalk Hills and Children. And I think I remember a sort of like, I can't remember which drummer it was. It was a jazz drummer where he sort of like saying, this track is a jazz track. And he was like breaking it down about like the harmonic arrangements and stuff, and there is so much to unpack with this album. That it's an incredibly dense album. It's full of ideas. It's a grower. It's one of the things which I found with XTC albums, especially in the later period, which is with every album that they released, it became, for me personally, less immediate. And albums which I had to listen to again and again to really get. I mean, there were always a couple of that immediately went, yeah, okay, here's a great song. But I think from this moment on, they were growers for me.
So the drummer is Pat Mastelotto, who
of course it was, yes.
Pat played Drums and Wires record, didn't he, on the one of my solo albums? Very nice man, Pat. I met him in the real world. We opened for Stickman once.
Oh, really?
He was lovely, and he tuned Stuart Ardrum's snare for us.
Really?
Amazing. Yeah, he was so lovely, and he was helping us unpack the drums, and he tuned Stuart's snare. And he was just like, no, you're Pat, you're in King Crimson. He was such a sweet guy, just a really nice man. And but yeah, so I didn't realise. I mean, I knew he played with XTC, but I didn't realise he was a drummer on this album. So that's really cool.
He started life with Mr. Mister, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, he was in Mr. Mystery was in, and then he was in Crimson with the Thrack era.
Which again, one of my favourite eras of King Crimson. We should talk about King Crimson at some point.
We should definitely talk about Thrack, because I think Thrack is the album that people don't. It's my favourite. It's my top 3 Crimson albums.
I would agree with you.
That one, Discipline, and Red are my 3 favourites. But I think the thing about Thrack is it does everything that King Crimson do really, really well in one box.
Yes.
It's got all the ambient things. It's got the heavy stuff. It's got all the interlocking guitar parts. Anyway, we're going on to a Crimson tangent.
But you could say that there's a lot of spillover that between that kind of attitude and certainly with XTC when it comes to Oranges and Lemons, because they cover so much musical ground on this record.
Unbelievable. I mean, like, it's a cliche to compare XTC to the Beatles, but not many other bands evolved like that, where they just, each record that came out, they were going to new places. You know what I mean? The chord changes are always surprising. Rhythmically, it's just. I'm so glad I found them, actually. I'm really, really glad that I spent a bit of time, and I got into Chalk Hill's website, the Dexter.
Yes.
God, I spent about 3 weeks just looking at that.
There's a huge amount of material out there on the web about that. In fact, I've got a book upstairs which goes through each of the tracks, our albums track by track, talking about how it was made and how it was put together. I think that was released around about the time of Nonsuch, so I don't think it got any further than that.
Let's move on to Nonsuch now then. I really like Nonsuch. I think that's a great. Once again, it's a refinement of the previous sound. Is it more sort of more jangly? A bit more jangly, this one.
Yeah, and it was one of these albums where, again, I think this is a classic album to as an example of how they began to, or how they were seen as the musicians and began to influence other bands. Because I remember that the Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead was a bigger hit for the Crash Test Dummies than it was for XTC.
Yeah, and when I went through this, did they do that one? And it was like, but this one's quite Beatley as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
is my favourite song on this one. Rook's really odd.
Yes, yeah, it is a very, very odd thing. Interestingly enough, I saw them doing a live version on BBC Two. I can't remember which program.
I found that for you. It's on the Late Show.
That's it, the Late Show.
They're doing Books of Burning, aren't they?
That's right, and it was the very first time I'd ever seen them play live.
Yeah, it was weird. And I think Dave Gregory's on keyboards, and
that's it.
Andy Partridge is on guitar, and he's a ripping guitar. There's a ripping lead at the end of it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a strange thing because you never associate sort of like dexterity on the guitar with Andy Partridge, because he was very much sort of like a rhythm guitarist, but he's a very handy guitarist.
It's really good, yeah. That
guy can play.
I mean, it's just a shame that later material didn't get performed live, because this, it would be great to see Dave Gregory and Andy Partridge playing their different parts on it. Just.
But it's got some really interesting tracks on this. I mean, of course, I think another one of the singles was The Disappointed as well.
That's a great record, yeah.
Which is sort of like, that's very much in the sort of what would you call it? Sort of like That's another one which always reminds me of the Beach Boys.
Yeah. That business, yeah.
But it's got some really odd, like as you say, Rook and Omnibus. Know,
yeah, great. I love all that stuff. Rook's, and it reminds me. It's a bit like what's the word on one of the songs on Smile? It's got a kind of a smiley sort of feel.
Oh yeah.
Plymouth Rock, roll over, kind of Surf's Up sort of feel to it.
Oh yeah.
To be fair, I think Andy Partridge's up there with your Brian Wilsons and your Paul McCartneys and your John Lennons. He's that kind of level talent, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely think he has a world-class songwriting head on him. I mean, I know that he, for many years, he actually wrote jingles and soundtracks and stuff for people, and as well as doing sort of like other bits and bobs before he started Ape as a record label and stuff. But yeah, interestingly enough, I was going to ask you about what you thought of the later period Moulding tracks, because he's starting to find a sort of what I would call a sort of like a much more gentler groove in later albums.
Like Bungalow.
Yeah.
I think Moulding gets more McCartney-esque as he gets older.
Yes.
Definitely got a McCartney warmth to it. But I think I like everything he's ever done. I think he's brilliant. I mean, he's very mellow, and especially what's the one? Bungalow's got very much a late period Paul McCartney.
Yes, yeah. It's a very echoey sort of almost. It's got a sort of almost Yola Tango kind of sort of like echo and warmth and darkness to it.
No, I mean Moulding's. I mean the other thing he probably only wrote. I mean, how many? 20 songs tops. Not a lot of songs, was there? Maybe he wrote more. They just didn't make it on the album. I don't know, but it's not that. I mean, you normally get one or two of his songs each album, don't you?
Yeah, but they're always worth a listen.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like let me mate have a go. They're all brilliant.
Yeah.
So we're on to Apple Venus Volume 1. So we lose Dave Gregory here, and I think that was a key thing. I think there's definite change here. The record's a little bit colder.
Yeah, I genuinely think that this is, while Non-Such, because I know that they had a lot of label troubles with Virgin, and that was the reason why there was a long delay between albums at this point in their career. But I think this was the beginning of Non-Such was kind of the beginning of the end, but you can see the end in sight with this, which is for me a little bit ironic considering that this was probably one of their better albums in the later period. I think it's definitely, in my opinion, stylistically up there with the sort of like the Big Express and the sort of earlier albums, not necessarily sounding wise, but in terms of their ability to sort of generate really iconic tunes.
Yeah, it's the last one that's like there's the jump into Apple Venus is massive, isn't it? It's a different thing.
This is the acoustic album. I think a lot of people sort of dubbed it as the acoustic, their unplugged album.
Apple Venus. Oh, yeah. Non-Such.
No, Apple Venus.
Apple Venus is all the it's all sort of orchestral, isn't it? Sort of.
Yeah.
I like Apple Venus a lot, but it doesn't feel like the other albums.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Although it has one of my opinion the best openings, which is River of Orchids.
River of Orchids, great, yeah. But it hasn't got any absolute standouts, has it?
No, I mean I think there's a
it's all good though. It's all really good.
This is the moment I think really from sort of their idiosyncrasies have always been in my opinion one of the hallmarks of their sound, but I think this is the album where their idiosyncrasies took over completely. And it's
no pop element to it at all, really, isn't
it? No, it's an incredibly idiosyncratic album.
It's a bit like a Scott Walker album or something like one of these sort of really clever, let's get all the instruments out and just don't care what anyone thinks. And But apparently,
I'm assuming you're talking about the mid-period Scott Walker and not the yelling into a slab of meat era.
Yeah, not the meat fighting era. Much as this guy find that stuff interesting, but not necessarily my cup of tea to listen to. But not,
you certainly wouldn't want to have it as a first dance at the wedding.
No. Scott Walker fighting some meat, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, so I do really like it, but I don't find myself listening to it. I find it's a heavy listen.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is.
Well,
there's a lot of suet to this one, but suet in itself is no bad thing.
No, it's certainly an interesting one. So, and it's nothing else like it. I don't know any other albums that particularly like it. It's still very, very original, isn't it?
I think the closest one that I would bring it to is and you mentioned it a little while earlier, which is Smile.
Smile, yeah, it's got that.
There's I think some cross sort of pollination between some of those, some of the tracks on Smile and some of the tracks on this album. So, Wasp Star, Apple Venus Volume 2, bit more like a normal XTC album, isn't it? Yeah, and apparently, I was surprised at this. According to a lot of critics, it's their worst album.
Really?
Stupid
Happy is a brilliant song.
See, I agree. I really like this album. I think this is very much sort of like a return, in my opinion, to form.
Yeah, and the Colin Moulding songs are very much like the other Colin Moulding songs. They're really good Beatley sort of pop songs, and no, I think it's pretty strong actually. I don't think that's. I don't agree with that.
The track Standing In For Joe is one. Not only is it very funny, it's also an incredibly catchy song.
I mean, I would have done like Stupidly Happy if I'd written a song as good as that. I mean,
exactly, yes.
I mean, it's insanely good songwriting.
And it's for me personally. I mean, I understand that it was originally going to get released as a double album, Apple Venus 1 and 2. I don't know why they didn't. Because it was released about a year or so apart, maybe.
I think it might have been better off mixing the tracks up between the two albums, to be honest.
Maybe. I mean, maybe they thought it was too much like it would have turned into a white album where you've had a sort of sonic sprawl and it would have been diluted, but. For me personally, I really enjoy this album. There's a lot of I'm the Man That Murdered Love is a great track.
If I'd written that, I mean, I'd love to be able to write songs like that. I mean, and he just pulls them out on a.
I know. This is where I start, because I don't know whether or not you're like this as a musician, but myself, as a young man, I was all ego and ambition. And I thought to myself, yeah, I can write a hit song. Yeah, I'm good. But as an older man, I went, yeah, they're great. They're better than I am.
It's been a really joyous experience for me, actually, listening to all these. And I don't think I've dug deep. I'm still digging.
Yeah.
And I think that my lockdown discoveries have been these. Opeth, I listened to.
Oh right, yeah.
I found a way into Opeth. There's been a few bands that I've listened to just because you've got a bit of time to have music on in the background while you're working and stuff. But I feel really privileged to have found the XTC catalogue because there's so much to it. It's so deep. And how did I not get into this before? But like I say, you've got to find an album to find your way in.
Yes.
It's like, I mean, I've started to listen to some of the Genesis back catalogue as well because I started to find a way into that because it's like a lot of music. If you go into the wrong place, like with ELP, right? I've never liked ELP because I listened to Works Volume 2 first, and I just didn't understand why anyone would ever want to listen to this. But it's like if you can find the album that you can get really into.
A track or an album acts as the doorway into the world, doesn't it, really? Exactly,
yeah. And, like with Genesis stuff, I mean, they're never going to be my favourite band, but I found, what was it the one I was listening to? Three Sides Live.
Oh, yeah.
That's really good. That's got some.
That was my gateway into their world, actually, funny enough, was Three Sides Live.
It's really interesting work on there. Keyboards sound amazing. There's no faffing about with stuff. And but before I tried to listen to The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and not got it at all.
Yeah.
Just didn't understand what was going on with it. You know what I mean? But it's a lot of bands you have to find a way in. Anyway, let's sum up the XTC experience, Simon.
Yeah. Well, for me, XTC has been a constant companion. They've been a huge influence on my writing, and I think they serve for me a dual function that I can really appreciate them as a musician, but also love them as a fan. And that's a very hard thing to do because it's so many things. Once you know how a magic trick works, it no longer has the magic.
No, that's very true. I mean, the thing is, I can see a lot of the internal workings of XTC stuff, but I don't know how they got there.
Yeah, and there I think it lies the secret is that they still have the ability to surprise me.
Yeah, I don't know how it works, but I don't know how. I can see the scaffolding.
Yeah,
but there's stuff that flows. Actually, I can't see on some of it, and like their best work, you can't see how they got from one bit to like. It's like Senses Working Overtime is probably the most unique single because the verse is so uncommercial, so hey, and that and it's just like it's like Voivod or something. It's like so,
you're right, yeah.
It's so odd. There's no way. But the chorus is so big. The chorus is like a Bob Mould chorus. It's like that, like a Bob Mould Copper Blue or a Beatles chorus. It's a genius, brilliant pop chorus. And you sort of think, how do you do that? And we don't really know because it's very hard to do. If we knew how to do it, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we? But
yeah, exactly. I always associate the Pixies with XTC as well. Sort of, it's like whereas they tend to be more quiet versus loud choruses. XTC are very much like dissonant choruses, dissonant verses, harmonic choruses. I do like that change in dynamic.
There's definitely a line between the last Pixies album, sounds a bit like XTC. What's the last one called? I can't remember what it's called, but I can't remember what it's called. The last Pixies album, where they had the keyboards and the more guitar, and it was definitely and then there's also a thing between Copper Blue era Bob Mould, which got very similar to dissonance and pop, and it's a really hard. The hardest thing to do is to meld dissonance and pop music. It's so hard to do. Yeah, but when it works, oh my god, it's just unbelievable, isn't it?
It is, and I think all of these people have had it innately inside them. I don't think that this is something that you learn. It's something which you want to explore, and because of a natural compulsion to do so.
It's definitely something that's well, if you could bottle it, we'd all do it, wouldn't you? I mean, I hope that one day I can. I'm not giving up yet. I still want to make a record that's as good as Well, I aspire to, never will, but something as good as what XTC have done, and there's. But I'm just so thankful to have found this music because it's been really, really meant a lot to me the last year because it's just so inspiring. And they become old friends, don't they? Yeah, and I haven't really talked about Dave Gregory's guitar player. He's a brilliant guitarist with lots of different. I love his 12-string playing. I love his. He's got a really beautiful, filthy instrument, and his arrangements are so clever as well. And just like, the arrangements on Skylarking are so clever, and it's just like. And initially I thought Todd Rundgren had done them, but I think Dave Gregory did those arrangements with a sequencer, and it's just like, and then they learned them for the strings. But he's done arrangements for Porcupine Tree and all sorts of people, hasn't he? And
he's a total musician, basically. That man, he makes music his bitch, like I can't.
I wish I'd known when I met him, so I could have told him how much I loved his music because I was completely ignorant to it. But I was very glad I got to see Tin Spirits. They were brilliant. I mean, Tin Spirits were they used to do Finish with Red. They did Red when they came. Did a cover of Red, by King Crimson.
I can't remember. I did see Tin Spirits play live, and I was always astonished by the fact that they were able to play stuff which had so much keyboards in just with guitars.
They did Roundabout, didn't they?
Yeah, but they knew all the chords.
Yeah.
You know, how do you know the chords to you know? It's just that's one of those things where you just think to yourself, yeah, this band are a cut above the rest.
Well, it's like Daniel from the Gig Rig. He's a massively successful businessman. He's also, you know, he works with all the top end guitarists, and also he's a phenomenally good guitarist himself. But he never bigs himself up at all. I mean, I have to say that pedal show has also been something that I've watched a lot of during lockdown as well, and I'm really thankful for them for doing that show because it really keeps you going. Right.
I love the.
Sorry, no.
I was going to say I love the fact that as with any good artist, the humanity shows through.
Yeah. It's wonderful stuff. Right, should we finish up?
Yeah, sure.
Simon, can you tell everyone where the best place to find all your music is, please? Or the best place to subscribe to your music or on YouTube?
The very first place I would say is go check out Bad Elephant Music. They're a label that's based in the UK. They've released the vast majority of my back catalogue. Failing that, you can, if you're interested in stuff like Tiny Fish, which is the band I used to be in before I left the UK, you can see and visit them at either the merch desk or tinyfish.org.
Brilliant. All highly recommended. Thank you so much, Simon. We'll do this again with some other bands if you're up for it.
Love to. Yeah, always a pleasure. Never a chore talking to you, mate.
You too. All right, thanks, dude. Brilliant stuff.
Later.